اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وعنده مفاتح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو ويعلم ما في البر والبحر وما تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. The last 6 lectures have been more theoretical from the point of view that I've tried to present an academic approach to what ihsan means, as we discovered in the hadith of Gabriel, when the Prophet ﷺ was asked what ihsan is, and he said to worship Allah as if you see him, and if you don't, then know that he sees you. So we tried to talk about why that's significant. We looked at the Quran and the Sunnah, we looked at the soul and the nafs and all of that kind of stuff. And I've tried to peg those things to certain trends of literature in Islamic intellectual history so that people can read up on it and things like that. So today we're going to shift gears a little bit and it'll be a little bit more practical. So the question before us today is, okay, if you follow all of these lectures, if you follow this discussion, how do you actually take that and implement it? How has the implementation of Islamic spirituality been throughout our history? So, and this is where maybe you lose some people, and which is why I wanted to leave this for the end. It's also, of the lectures, probably the easiest one because this is a pretty straightforward conversation. But I wanted to leave it at the end so we can always reference back to some of the other things that we talked about. Any discipline, all of the stuff we've spoken about, particularly in the first lecture when we talked about Islam, Iman, Ihsan, as sort of the thirds that make up the whole of Islam, the legal sciences, the theological sciences, and the spiritual discipline. All of these make up Islam because the Prophet ﷺ said at the end of the hadith when he asked Umar, do you know Atadri man as-sa'il? Do you know who the questioner was? And then Umar says, Allah and his Prophet know best. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Hada Jibreel ja'a yu'allimukum deenukum. This is Gabriel, he has come to teach you your religion. So all of the stuff that was mentioned in that hadith equal Islam. So if somebody says, well, what is Islam? Islam is these 3 or 4 things. It is the legal discipline, Islam, the theological discipline, Iman, the spiritual discipline, Ihsan, and then the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah, those are part of the theology. So all of that stuff, has a theoretical conversation and also has a practical conversation. So if you want to learn fiqh, we talked about fiqh being the answers to how do you act. But if you want to learn fiqh, you've got to go to a fiqh teacher. And to go to a fiqh teacher, you need to go to somebody who has studied one of the schools of Islamic law and can teach you fiqh according to that school of Islamic law. And the school, the madhab of Islamic law, it's like your crutch until you are able to walk on your own. That's how you should think about it. Not that the madhabs are sort of this ossification of legal thinking and I'm stuck and it's draconian, and I don't know why modern Muslims, they have this narrative. So to undo this, just think of it as a crutch. If you're able to walk on your own and do Islamic law on your own, all the power to you. Chances are you'll never be able to do that. Like 99.9% you'll never be able to do that. But think of it that way so you can be liberated from this, idea that Islamic law somehow is backward, etc. So to learn Islamic law, you need to go to somebody who's done it, who can teach it, etc. To learn theology, it's the same thing. You need to go to somebody who has studied Sunni theology, in the case of Sunni Islam, which is our assumption in these lectures. And you need to go to somebody who can teach you Islamic theology, according to the 2 schools that make up Sunni Islam. With a spiritual discipline, it's the same thing. You need to go to somebody who can teach you how to do these things. Maybe this is more important or equally important because of all of the things we've discussed up until now. A lot of times the discussion can almost be overwhelming. Because when it comes to the spiritual discipline, you are always going to be stuck asking yourself, what should I do now? What should I do next? Should I pray more? Should I fast more? Should I read Quran more? Should I make dhikr more? You're going to ask yourself, and all of those are good things. If you chose any of those, they're good. But what should you do? What will help you in your role? How can you? And then you start getting conflicted. Oh, I should probably be reading Quran more, but I really want to read this book by Imam al-Ghazali because I like it, but I feel bad. I should read Quran. And you start to trip yourself up. Or should I look at the book of, we mentioned Imam al-Nawawi's book of the Adhkar, the book of remembrance. Should I read all of those Adhkar? Should I memorize them all? What am I supposed to do? And this is why you need a teacher in all of the disciplines. Because if you try to do this on your own, you're going to fall flat on your face. You're going to take on too much responsibility. So the practical way that this has been implemented throughout history is that there is a teacher, and the teacher is usually called the sheikh, and usually is a man, but doesn't have to be a man. There is you, the student, and there is this specific path, the specific way, the system that you're going to follow of how to implement all of the stuff that we've talked about. And throughout our history, this has been called a tariqah, this has been called a path. And the reason it's called a path is the same reason that the Sharia is called the Sharia, because the Sharia is also a path. It's also a way that you follow your actions. So this path, this way of implementing Islamic spirituality, the reason it's called a way, a path, is because it's your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember last week we talked about that one of the rules is that Allah is your goal. Because that's what the Prophet ﷺ said. What is ihsan? To worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you can't, then at least know that He sees you. So that's the goal. The goal is, I want to get to that, mode that when I'm worshiping, I see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or I see the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm cognizant of Allah, I'm not heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah is the goal. So when we say path, it assumes that I'm starting where I am, and I'm moving this way, I know where I'm going, I know what the signs are, I know what the exits are, I know where the detours are. The path is laid out. So this motif is common. And this is the motif of the Prophet ﷺ. مَنْ سَلَكَ طَرِيقًا يَلْتَمِسُ بِهِ عِلْمًا سَهَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ طَرِيقًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. The Prophet ﷺ says in the Sahih Hadith, whoever follows a path of knowledge, tariq, the Prophet ﷺ called it a path, then Allah eases his path to the paradise. So even the Prophet ﷺ himself used this motif. Okay? So there's the sheikh, there's you as the student, and there is the way itself. And we have tons and tons and tons of literature about each one of those things. How do you find the sheikh? What are the conditions of the sheikh? How are you supposed to be vis-a-vis the sheikh? What is this path? All of that kind of stuff. So we're going to maintain the same approach by looking at it academically and laying down these broad rules and parameters so that we can understand what those three things are. Like all of the disciplines, we've discussed the Sharia disciplines, the theological disciplines. The person, the sheikh that's going to teach you this, that's going to help you down this path, they have to be trained themselves and have to be licensed to be able to do that. So just like you need to go to a tajweed teacher to teach you tajweed, that tajweed teacher has to have a degree in teaching tajweed. They have to have an ijazah, that they have studied with somebody who taught them how to recite the Quran, and then they're passing that on to you. Because all of this stuff is passed on generation to generation, the way that the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba. And that's the key. When we say that this is all based on the Quran and the Sunnah, all of this is going to go back to that. So this is the inheritance, or part of the inheritance of the Prophet ﷺ. So the sheikh, in this regard, the teacher / coach, and I'm using these words on purpose so we don't get tripped up with all of the misconceptions. They're just that. They're supposed to teach you this discipline. And if they are licensed to teach you this discipline, then they are authorized to teach you this discipline and to help you, guide you down this path. It's as simple as that. You don't have to think of this person as a saint or as a holy person or as somebody that you can't touch or somebody that you can't look at or somebody that you have to give all your wealth to or all of that, all of those things that make up those misconceptions. Don't think of it like that. But this is your coach. And the reason I use the word coach, specifically, whereas the other disciplines, it's better to think of them as a teacher, is that when it comes to your tazkiyah, you are the goal, you are the main player. You have to live your life. The sheikh can't live that life for you. So the sheikh is more like a coach, teaching you how to play that game called life. How not to fall, how not to submit to your lower nafs, how to be a better person. And the coach motif is better because the coach idea assumes that the coach knows the game, knows the plays, and is observing you playing that game. So maybe there's a move that works for many teams or many players, but when you come to do that move, the coach notices that you can't do it. So the coach says, okay, forget that move, try another move. I mean, I'm speaking abstractly and generically so you can sort of understand. So the sheikh in this regard, think of that as the coach. So you go to the coach, you check in, the coach tells you, okay, this is the game plan, follow it, and then come back to me. You follow it or you don't follow it, you go back or you don't go back, and so on and so forth goes the relationship. And this is why in the world of Islamic spirituality, we see so much plurality. Whereas in Islamic law, not so much. In Islamic theology, not so much. Because the difference is each one of us are built individually different, in a different way. Yes, we are body, soul, and self, as we've discussed previously. But our nafs, all of us is different. We are all wired differently. And each one of us will have a way, will have a path that will be custom made for us individually that will help us. And that's why there's all of this plurality. That's why we have all of these options. We can fast, we can pray, we can do service, we can study, we can do dhikr, we can read the Quran. All of these things are tools and strategies for us to improve ourselves so that we can fulfill this goal of what the Prophet ﷺ said is excellence and perfection in religion. But you're not going to be able to do that unless you have a coach. But when the coach gets you going and you're on your way, then you need the coach less and less. And you become an expert at your own self. And you kind of figure out, okay, this is what I need to be doing, and you're on your way, and you just check in with the coach less and less and less until you are free of that crutch and you're on your own. And in the literature, the literature of tasawwuf says that when the murid or the student, the one that is seeking, comes to the sheikh and the sheikh sees that they have arrived, they say, okay, here you are with Allah. You have arrived. Keep going. You don't need me anymore. And that's why I like this idea of a coach more than the sheikh. And especially today, and especially in the English language, in the English-speaking Muslim world, there's so much confusion about this stuff, which is why I wanted to put this material together in the first place, because I think people have a really wrong idea of what this stuff is all about. And there can be a lot of abuse and things like that. Okay, those are sort of like introductory remarks. What I want to say next is I put together 5, are they 5? Yeah, okay, 5 things to think about, 5 rules or 5 principles you should think about if you want to take this stuff seriously and you are seeking somebody to help you in this aspect of your life, okay? Number 1 is you need to find a path that is closest to the Sunnah. While there are spiritual disciplines that have evolved in Islam that are compatible with the Sunnah, there are those that are closer to the Sunnah. So notice the language, closest to the Sunnah. Like if you ask me, there are many spiritual disciplines that will make their students do all of these great, huge, massive efforts, or like, fasting every day of the year, or, things that are very difficult. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not haram. But that's not closest to the Sunnah. Because the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is always ease. Yasiru wa la tu'asiru. The Prophet said. So our example is always the prophetic model. The Prophet was easygoing, he was gentle, he was merciful. Some people need tough love, but that's not necessarily the closest way of the Prophet. The Prophet was a softie when he came to the believers. Allah says in the Quran that they are difficult with the enemy, but they are easygoing with each other. So the Prophet was easygoing with the companions and merciful with the companions. So you need a teacher who is going to, or a way that exemplifies that. Because if you find something that is not that way, that's sort of where things kind of can lose their balance. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is, like with any discipline, the sheikh, the coach, whatever word we're going to use, that you are going to go to for this stuff has to have a direct chain back to the Prophet ﷺ. There is no spiritual advancement if that doesn't exist at all whatsoever. Anybody that doesn't have that is a charlatan, is a joke, is fake, is going to, you're going to, crash and burn with that person. And this is like a degree. So, when you go to a doctor's office, there are all these degrees in the back. No one ever reads them, but you expect to see that you go to a lawyer's office or whatever. I mean, have you ever read that stuff? I never read that stuff. But you just said, okay, check, check it. They have a license. You have to be licensed. If you're not licensed, don't play this game. It's as simple as that. Go get a license. So in our case, it's the same thing as if you go to learn fiqh. If you go to learn fiqh and the sheikh doesn't follow a madhab, what are you doing? That's what fiqh is. Fiqh are the madhab. There's no such thing as, I'm going to teach you fiqh without teaching you the madhab. That's impossible. That's like I'm going to teach you how to swim by not learning how to swim. You can't. Or I'm going to teach you how to swim without teaching you how to tread water. You have to learn how to tread water at least so you don't sink. And then you can learn the different strokes. It's the same thing. If you want to learn Islamic law, you have to study within a method. It's impossible to learn Islamic law otherwise. Same thing with tajweed, same thing with grammar, same thing with whatever. You have to have a license. In this case, if there's no chain directly linking this teacher back to the Prophet ﷺ, there's no accountability, you don't know who their teacher are, you don't know where they're coming from, it becomes very dangerous. That's number two. Number three, which is sort of, we kind of touched on it, but it bears in mind stating it explicitly, is you have to find a path that is easy. Imam Abu Dawood, he narrates a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ was never given the option of choosing between things, except that he chose the easier of the options as long as no sin was involved. So the Prophet ﷺ chose the easy way. Islam is the easy way, and therefore your spiritual practice has to be easy. Who wants to feel like a loser all the time? You don't want a coach that's going to make you feel like you're a loser all the time. Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of tough love, like get out of bed, a little bit, but it's got to be done with like a smile. If you feel crappy all the time, you're not going to follow that trainer, you're not going to follow that coach, you're going to leave your job. People complain about this stuff all the time. People leave their spouses all the time because they feel miserable. This is the most sensitive of matters. Your soul, your eternal life, between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't want to feel crappy about yourself all the time. So you need to find a way that's easy. You need somebody that's going to help you, that's going to sort of pamper you in a spiritual sense, make things easy for you, give you hope, give you optimism, because this is the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah addresses the Prophet sallallahu in the Quran and says, if you were tough with people, they would have left you. But rather the Prophet sallallahu was a rahmah, he was a mercy. He said, إِنَّمَا أَنَا رَحْمَةٌ مُهْدَى. Indeed, I have been sent to you as a merciful gift. وَبِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. And with the believers, merciful and compassionate, addressing the Prophet ﷺ. So like I said, it was a softie when it came to the companions, as long as no sin, of course, was involved. And that's why people loved him, even his enemies loved him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, so finding a way that's easy. For some reason, we have this problem where religious teachers are always frowning, are always, they don't look good, they don't smell good, they don't talk well, they're always yelling, they're always, I don't know why, but that's not the way of Islam, that's not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He was so handsome and so beautiful that the people that described him for us described him with such intimate detail that if you read this description, you can envision him in front of you, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If he was, stuff for like an ugly person, a nasty person, we wouldn't have those descriptions. But the fact that we know how soft his cheeks were, and how beautiful his eyes were, and how radiant his face, all of these beautiful descriptions, because people loved him. So your teacher has to be somebody that you kind of can see that in. Not that they're the prophet, but they are inheriting that aspect of the prophet of mercy and ease. So don't hang out with people that make you Islamically feel like a loser. That's bad. Number 4, you need to find a way that is accessible vis-a-vis its, let's say, its game plan, its curriculum. It has to be something accessible. But if you heard like there's like some saintly sheikh in like some cave somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, most likely that's not going to be your way, because it's very hard to get to that person. You need something like, we're like lazy, or we need something that you just get on your phone. Is there an app for that? Is there, can I download something and just send me something? And it's got to be something that you can access. There has to be this accessibility. Accessibility of published works. This path is known. There are hundreds and hundreds of books written about it. You can, etc. You have to be able to. There has to be accessibility with the published works and the person themselves. And then number 5, there has to be a great deal of compatibility between you and the sheikh. And this is also, I think, where a lot of people flounder. You don't get along with everybody. And that's normal. We're all different. So some people you get along with really well. You meet them and you're like, oh, I feel like I've known this person my whole life. And there are some people you just can't stand. I know there are people in my life that I just can't stand them. There's nothing wrong with them, Islamically. I just can't say. Every time I'm with them, I feel this darkness in the conversation. I really don't want that feeling, and I just try to avoid being in their orbit. It doesn't mean that they're bad and I'm good, or that I'm bad and they're good. There's just no compatibility. So if you don't have a good rapport with your teacher, with your coach, you're most likely not going to get far. If your sheikh, if you have this vision that your sheikh is like this huge, unreachable, holy person, and you're frightened of them, you're probably not going to benefit from that. Because you need to have a relationship with the sheikh. You need to be able to, better yourself. If you can't even look at their face, or you can't meet them, or everything is so formal around them, and it's you see it. I have people that have come to me and said that I'm in this path and I have this sheikh, but I said, well, haven't you talked to him about it? He's like, oh, I never meet him. I was like, why? He's like, oh, he's inaccessible. I was like, well, maybe Allah's trying to tell you that that's just not your way, right? Because there's no rapport. It doesn't mean that the sheikh is bad or is a charlatan or that you're bad. It means that there's no compatibility. Very few people have the capacity to be compatible with everybody. It's a very rare, a rare trait. And usually somebody like that usually is suspicious, because we're like, why is he's too charismatic, sometimes we say. So there has to be some kind of rapport that you have with your teacher, with your coach, that you can get along and things like that. The last thing I want to say, before I want to hear from you, is the question that can emerge after this discussion is, what happens if I don't find this? Or what do I do if I'm looking for this? And in our literature, the solution to this is to increase your prayers on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at least 500 times a day. The idea is that the salawat on the Prophet sallallahu becomes your guiding way and your guiding tool, and to continue that way until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests something for you. Maybe Allah won't. Maybe that salawat is going to be your tool to work all this stuff out, and that's great. Or maybe you do that, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides you to somebody, and that's also great. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never leaves us without giving us a solution. So in this case, the solution is the prayers on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'll leave it there for today. Any questions?
In the beginning, you were talking about the distinction between the legal, theological, and spiritual split. Did you say there was one more, or only 3? different.
Well, in the hadith, Gabriel also asked the Prophet ﷺ about the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah. But academically, the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah are part of theology. So in Islam theology, it has three subject headings. It has theology dealing with God, ilahiyat, theology dealing with the prophets, plural, nubuwat, and theology dealing with eschatology, things that will come, sam'iyat, things that we hear about. We haven't seen them, but we heard about them, meaning the Prophet ﷺ informed us that these things will happen as signs of the Day of Judgment and will happen after. That's what eschatology is, things to come, and we believe in it. So our theology discusses those, in great detail, but those are the three subject headings of Islamic theology. So even though there are four questions in the hadith, that fourth question is subsumed historically under Iman. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The principle number 2 of condition number 2, you mentioned that there should be Mashiach and Prophet a chain.
Yes.
And you explained it for the equivalent in fiqh, what is the when it comes spirituality, could you elaborate a little bit what you mean by a chain?
Yeah, what we call a sanad. There has to be a chain of transmission.
Okay.
A sanad and an ijazah. Every statement in Islam has to have a chain back to the Prophet ﷺ. And Abdullah ibn Mubarak, the famous tabi'i, he said, Al-Isnadu min ad-din, that this chain of transmission is religion. وَلَوْلَا الْإِسْنَادُ لَقَالَ مَنْ شَاءَ مَا شَاءَ. And if it were not for this chains of transmission, anyone could say what they want. There is no utterance in Islam except that we can trace it back to the Prophet ﷺ in an unbroken chain. Historically, this is how we establish the veracity of the Quran and the Sunnah. And therefore, this chain of transmission is extended to all of the other disciplines. So even like, for example, I studied Shafi'i fiqh, my chain of transmission goes back to Imam al-Shafi'i, but from Imam al-Shafi'i, it goes back to Imam Malik and all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there can be no teaching in the name of Islam without that. And if there is, then, anyone can say what they want. This is our, page verification. This is our blue check mark. If we have this, then we can verify what we have said. Yeah, this goes back to Islam. Goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. If we don't, you just shrug your shoulders and be like, okay, well, what's that? So, same thing.
So this chain of transmission, when you mentioned that the coach has to have this, he has to go back to transmit. Is it his saying or himself has to be?
The game plan that he's going to give you,
Has to be.
that has the chain of transmission back to the Prophet ﷺ.
I was thinking, but the person has to have his chain.
No, it's like his degree.
And where to look for those people?
Ask Allah. He'll guide you. If it's in your nasib, because sometimes this is too much for people. Maybe half the people in the room now be like, yeah, but this is bid'ah, Okay, it's not for you. To keep thinking it's bid'ah until you're 80 years old and you're like, oh, I wish I listened to Tarek. It's on you.
But when someone is learning, so he will accept everything from the coach and he doesn't know if it's really his transmission, he's saying goes back or he's just making it up.
Ask them. When you go to the office, where's the degree?
We're a student, we don't know.
We know. There's a way to verify. Because if you don't have that, then this person, they can just say whatever, they just make things up. And there have been people that have done that. Yeah, and then all of a sudden everyone in the village starts, giving them food and this and that. And, he's like married to like 10 women and at the same time, and but I'm the sheikh. This is Quran and Sunnah, it's haram. So that's why when we discussed all of this, I said, I'm going to discuss it from the outside. Because if you discuss it from the inside, all of these people, everyone has a bad story. Right? I know there are bad stories, but this is so important that we can't throw this out just because of those bad stories. Rather, we need to understand what this is that we're talking about, so we have a standard. And then we measure everything against that standard. Like somebody was saying recently, I interviewed these people yesterday they run this program to help people, Muslims that have been abused, spiritually abused by mashayikh. I'll upload the episode like within a week, inshallah. You can listen to the interview. So I think that's important. Okay, so I interviewed them. And then, one of the stories that they say is, oh, so-and-so, everything's anonymous. So-and-so was with this sheikh, and then this sheikh told the woman student, I'm going to do ruqya, and then he kissed her. Yeah, the sheikh is going to make out with his female. This is Islam. This is garbage. This is not the sunnah. This is not Quran and sunnah. Like if you see me making out with somebody in the parking lot, I hope you ask me not to come back to the mosque. Then there has to be accountability. Is there abuse? Of course there's abuse. I mean, anything can be abused. Anything can be abused. I've seen people abuse the authority that they have the key to the door of the mosque. So then they'll lock the door when they don't want somebody to come in the mosque. The mosque is where you're supposed to pray to God. They'll abuse that authority. So anything can be abused. But we can't let that abuse make us throw out our Islam. But rather our job is to learn what real Islam is. Now we have a standard in front of us. I tried to do the best I can. I'm sure I could have done better. Now we have a standard in front of us. Now we can measure against that. Is there abuse? Is there not abuse? Is this real or is this fake? And these rules I'm giving, are very broad. And these are very easy to ascertain. If it doesn't smell right, it doesn't look right, most likely it's not right. So that's, something it's important, to keep in mind. I know there's a lot of bad stuff out there. And this is one way that shaitan plays with us. He makes us doubt, this doesn't exist, or maybe this was at the time of the Sahaba only, or, you mentioned Imam al-Ghazali, who's like Imam al-Ghazali now. This is one of shaitan's ways, that he plays with you to think that there's no khair. But the Prophet ﷺ said, Ummatik al-matar, my ummah is like the rain. You don't know which of it is going to be good, the beginning of the rain or the end of the rain. Meaning that there is goodness in the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ until Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is an article of our belief. We believe that there's goodness in this ummah until the final hour. So inshallah we ask Allah to guide us to that goodness and protect us from all that nonsense, inshallah. Now.
So, if we walk fast, we just Google and
No, don't Google. Ask Allah to guide you. Yeah, this is nasib. This is part of your risk.
So I ask Allah and I wait for a sign.
Yeah, you wait for a sign, or Allah will guide you in that direction. There has to be a little bit of it's like laissez-faire. You just gotta kind of back off. You have to relinquish control because Allah's in control, not you. And this we have to remind ourselves, because a lot of this has to do with tawfiq, or like compatibility, and you feel comfortable and Allah guides you. And when you see it, you'll know it. What happens if you don't do the salat on the Prophet? It's not going to harm you to increase your salawat on the Prophet, because all of this is following his way. That's our goal, is to follow his way. So ask Allah. Allah is generous. Allah Kareem. Allah will guide us.
Don't you have to make some effort? It just seems like, you're just, I've done it by praying, but you have to do something, don't you?
That's the doing. That's the doing. You always get the doctor you deserve. Same thing. You always get the sheikh, you deserve. There are some people that are relentless. They're like, I'm going to seek it. I want it, and I'm going to, transform my life. Yeah, those people, they get something. And then there are other people that, either they're older in life, or they're established in life, or, they're limited in their education or resources or whatever. Everyone gets, Allah is generous. So Allah's not going to give you like something bad. You have to think good of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you get what you are, what you can handle. What happens if you go to the university for you're a freshman on campus, and there's like a Nobel Prize economist, and you take that class? You're not going to learn anything unless you're like a prodigy. It's just too much. You can't understand. I've been in classes with amazing professors, and now I kick myself for not benefiting. But I wasn't ready to benefit from them. It was too advanced for me. This is also, you have to think of it as the same way. The same way. But now we're creating like a framework. So now let's just let that sink in, and then we can worry about the next step. But we have to agree to the framework first, and agree that there's good Islam and bad Islam.
Well, that's timing. I'm just remembering, one day is a
Yes, okay, and but asking Allah is the sign. وَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this is about you and your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So the idea is I'm not saying don't try, but there's no like classified ads in the paper that says, looking for spiritual coach, looking for a student. If you find that, don't answer that ad. Stay away from that ad. This is something that's just more natural. Perhaps happen naturally.
Does the coach of the rig have to follow the same method as you, or can that be?
No, that's secondary. Because the madhab, as long as you're following a madhab, that means you're following the sunnah. All of the madhab are the sunnah. There's another misconception. I don't want to follow the madhab, I want to follow what the Prophet said. That's one of the dumbest sentences anyone's ever said in Islam. The madhab is the sunnah. But all of the commands of the Prophet ﷺ, embedded in his words is plurality, because there are different ways to understand what he said. Like when the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba, "La tusalliyanna al-asra illa fi Bani Qurayza." Do not pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. So the companions left. Some of the companions, they stopped in the journey halfway to pray Asr prayer. The other half, they missed the Asr prayer. They got to Bani Qurayza after Maghrib came in. They prayed Maghrib and they prayed Asr Qadr. So they both asked the Prophet ﷺ, who was right? He said, both of you are correct. Because the Prophet's statement, ﷺ, do not pray until you get to Bani Qurayza, can be interpreted both ways. One said he's just telling us, get a move on it. But Asr came in, you have to pray. The other group said, no, the Prophet ﷺ, this is a special case. He said, do not pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. Who was right? Both are right. So there's two madhabs then. There's two ways of understanding. So all of the madhab, and by the way, there have been over 90 madhabs in Islamic history, not just 4. There are 4 robust and popular ones. But throughout Islamic history, there have been over 90 madhabs. All of them are following the Kitab and the Sunnah. So, no, the short answer is no. You don't have to follow the madhab of your shaykh.
So it comes that teaching is the same. Quran is explicit. Explicit. There's no question about it. And now its explanation is from the Sunnah, from our Prophet, peace be upon him. So the teaching of Quran and Sunnah, they have to go together. Sure. They cannot go separate, right?
Yeah.
So we have to know which is the real, which is the real hadith. The real hadith, which goes compatible with the teachings of God. So we have to know that. That's important. Then the person.
But even still, uncle, there are differences.
So then the person who is sitting on the pulpit represents our Prophet, peace be upon him. It is the Prophet. Whatever person is sitting, whether it is Sheikh or some other person, he is the representative of the Prophet on that pulpit. So he has to have the real, Sunnah, the real hadith with him to hold the teaching to the public.
Sure.
So which is the one?
Okay, let me ask you a question. The Imam is giving the Jummah prayer. He started the khutbah. You come in late to the mosque. Should you pray the 2 rak'ah sunnah, or should you sit and listen? Who thinks you should pray the 2 rak'ah sunnah? No. Okay, who thinks you should sit down and listen to the Imam? Which one is right? Now both, right? But why both? Okay, so both are correct, right? Did you know that both opinions follow the same exact hadith in Bukhari? It's the hadith of Sulaik. There was a Sahabi named Sulaik. He came to the mosque late and he sat down and the Prophet ﷺ was giving the khutbah. And then the Prophet ﷺ stopped himself and he said, Sulaik, why did you not pray the 2 rakahs to greet the mosque? So Sulaik stood up and prayed. Imam Malik, he said, you see this hadith? This is why you are not supposed to pray the 2 rak'ahs. And then Imam Shafi'i said, you see this hadith? This is why you're supposed to pray the 2 rak'ahs. Why? Because Imam Shafi'i's methodology of interpreting the Quran and Sunnah is to take the prima facie meaning of the text, as long as there's nothing wrong with the prima facie meaning. Is there anything wrong with understanding this hadith to mean that you should stand and pray? No. So I'm a Shafi'i. If I come into the mosque late, I will pray the 2 rak'ahs. Imam Malik, he said, but you don't understand. When you read the biography of the Sahabi Sulaik, you discover that Sulaik lived in the suburbs outside of Medina, and he was poor. And he only came to town on Fridays, so that the wealthier Sahaba would give him food and some money. So because Sulaik made it late to the mosque, out of mercy for him, the Prophet ﷺ didn't want to embarrass him, so he made him stand to pray the 2 rak'ahs so everyone would see that he was in the mosque. So Imam Malik, he interprets the hadith as being khas, as being particular, while Imam Shafi'i interprets the hadith as being aam, as being general. Both are correct. Both are following the sunnah. Follow what you are used to following. But I'm just trying to show you, and this is just one simple example, I'm trying to show you that there is no sharia without the madhab. There is no Islam without the madhab. Whoever says that is lying, not worth their weight in anything.
I think the rule is to finish that straight. Doesn't do it.
Me, I will pray because this is the school, but I studied. Most of you have not studied the Sharia, so you don't have to worry about that. I do, I'm screwed because I'm studying. So I have to teach. Now, it's okay, both are correct.
But the reason why you said that you would is because you said, because you're a Shafi'i. For somebody like me and others who don't have selected a particular mazhab, first off, can we do that? Second off, if we have, in general, can we, I feel like we need to feel the situation. If I feel like I'm gonna be disruptive, then I won't.
That's fine. The madhab situation is for people that study Islamic law. If you haven't studied Islamic law, your madhab is the madhab of the person that you ask questions to. That's why I said I'm screwed. So you ask me a question, you're relieved. You just follow what I tell you, and I hope, and the burden is on me to be correct. So people also misunderstand this. They're like, no, all Muslims have to study a madhab. No, that's like saying everyone has to get like a CPA degree and everyone has to become a lawyer and everyone has to be an engineer and then you're a well-rounded person. That's impossible. So this is a technical thing. So Islamic law is something technical. If you enter into that field, you can only enter into that field through one of those alleys of studying the madhab. Eventually you learn all the other opinions. But for all of you guys, with the exception of some of my students here that have studied this stuff with me, you do what you're used to doing. And if I see that you're doing something wrong, I have to correct you. What does that mean you're doing something wrong? That you are doing something that all of the madhab say is wrong. But as long as somebody says it's correct, even outside of the 4 schools, then it's fine. And that's an important principle, that we only critique and criticize when we violate something that everyone has agreed on. Like lying. No madhab says it's okay to lie. Like stealing. No madhab says it's okay to steal. All of that other stuff, as long as there are differences of opinion, my job is to leave you at peace, be happy, feel it out. If you can be disruptive, that's fine. No problem. So my point was only to show you that when we say, Quran and Sunnah, everyone has this idea that it's a singular interpretation. There's no singular interpretation when it comes to that. Because the plurality is embedded in the Arabic language. That's why it's revelation. That's a proof that this is not man-made. This is revelation. You understand that point?
My question still remains there. That is, we follow one book, that is the Quran.
Yes.
So we should follow one hadith, not channel.
No, I just showed you an example. This is one hadith.
Which is the one, like it is entitled Al-Quran.
Oh.
So which hadith is entirely, which is universal, which is by consensus, and same thing for everybody.
But when it comes to ibadat, when it comes to acts of worship, let's say 70%, 80% of the madhab are the same. Like there's no madhab that says, oh, there's only 4 prayers during the day, and another madhab says there's only 2 fard, and then I say there's 5. No, we all know that there's 5 prayers, that each prayer has X number of rak'ah. I mean, it's all the same. I'm just showing you simple things that there are differences.
That's right, but I am still remaining there. There should be one book, or one volume of many books,
But there can't be, that's impossible.
Why you can't? Because it's all
Because the
same,
interpretation of the ayat and the interpretation of the hadith have multiple equally valid interpretations. Imam Shafi'i, when he interpreted the verse of the waiting period of the woman, he interpreted the word qur', ثلاثة قروء in the Quran, as being periods of purity. But the word qur' in the Arabic language can also be used for the time of the cycle, of the menstrual cycle itself. And if you look in the dictionary, both definitions are correct. So Imam Shafi'i has to choose one, and then Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik, he chooses another. They're both equally valid. So this is where the plurality of the opinions come, but it's all following the Quran and the Sunnah. You see what I'm saying? And I'm trying to make it very simple. It's even more complicated than that, but I'm trying to make it super simple. Now,
have you noticed any particular tariqas that have had more success or taken root more in the West than others? Are there some tariqas that lend themselves are more compatible with Western?
No, I think as Western Muslims we have failed spectacularly in many aspects of Islam. I don't know why that's the case, but maybe it's a sociological thing, I don't know, or like the American thing in us, but no, because you see how I presented this? I try to present this stripped down. The reality is all of these turuq, there's a lot of cultural stuff that gets wedded with the spiritual stuff. So you take this tariqah, and then you come out looking like you're from West Africa, right? You go to this tariqah, and then you come out looking like you're from Yemen. You go, and did we talk about that? It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And as a matter of fact, one of the distinguishing features of Islam, historically, especially in the formative period, is that Islam was very flexible when it came to its cultural manifestation. The Sahaba, when they went to Persia, they wore the Persian pants. They prayed in the Persian pants. Why? Because in Arabia, they're wearing, like the ihram like that we wear, they're wearing like the izar. You're going to freeze to death if you're in Persia, and it's like, you can't wear that. But there are some people that dress like that even in Michigan, because this is the sunnah. But it's not the sunnah. It's the sunnah because it was, the Arabian desert. It was like 900 degrees. When it's freezing, they put on the pants. There's nothing wrong with that. So they look like Persians. The Prophet himself, he had different articles of clothing that came from different parts of the world. But I mean, he tended to dress as an Arabian. So what ends up happening is you get so overwhelmed by the culture of the path that it becomes almost like a cult. So you start dressing the same way, talking the same way, eating the same kind of foods. And if you're an American and you do that, you become very, very odd. That's not how you're supposed to be. But yeah, I guess maybe I'm very negative about that. But that's been my experience. Maybe that's been your experience too. I don't know. No.
A few years ago, I was involved in interfaith dialogue. And one day we were meeting with a group of rabbis. So I did my homework and I went through some questions. Many of these questions they couldn't answer, and some that actually they did. So the rabbi, if he couldn't answer, he gave me a very good answer. He said, you know what, you're right. But the reality, we struggle to understand our religion. And I respect that because I see it reflects on Islam as well. We should do ijtihad in understanding Quran. Don't you see limiting the understanding of Quran to the four madahib would contradict with us doing the ijtihad, the interpretation of the religion based on the 12th century, 13th century, a lot of things happening now. I mean, we're struggling explaining Quran, Islam to our kids because it's different life.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I'm not struggling to understand the Quran. There's nothing hidden in Islam that we haven't reached. Maybe my ma'lumat is qasir. Maybe I don't know this specific issue, but I can go look it up. It's been documented. The problem is with the idea of the madahib is that people assume that ijtihad somehow stopped in some part. And the madhab now is a copy and paste of what happened 600-700 years ago. But that's not what a madhab means. As a matter of fact, that's a Western narrative. And that Western narrative, who does that belong to? Who is responsible for this bid'ah amongst the Western Orientalists? Further back? Further back? Further back? Habit? They didn't teach you this in habit. This is why you got to come to ICCP. Huh? No, for Christian Hergani Snook, who was a Dutch Orientalist, who mistranslated the introduction of Imam al-Bayjuri's Hashia in Shafi'i fiqh. In Imam al-Bayjuri's Hashia in Islamic in Shafi'i fiqh, Imam al-Bayjuri talks about the different types of ijtihad. He talks about ijtihad mustaqil, ijtihad mutlaq, ijtihad muqayyad, etc. And he mistranslated that and thought that what Imam al-Bayjuri is saying is that there is no more ijtihad. And this narrative that the gates of ijtihad are closed is so infused in amongst contemporary Muslims that many Muslim thinkers themselves think that ijtihad gates are closed. There is no door to ijtihad. Ijtihad is a fard, is an obligation until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Imam al-Suyuti, he wrote a risala, الرد على من أخلد في الأرض وجهل أن الاجتهاد في كل عصر فرض. Imam al-Suyuti, he wrote a treatise criticizing somebody who ignores the fact that ijtihad is an obligation until Yawm al-Qiyamah. What the madhab means is the madhab says, okay, this is an apparatus, an interpretive tool set that we're going to use to interpret the Quran and Sunnah. I follow the interpretive tool set laid down by Imam al-Shafi'i and redacted by the Shafi'i jurists after him. And I use those tools until today to make ijtihad from the Quran and the Sunnah. That's what the madhab is. So it's ongoing, it lives and it breathes. It doesn't stop. What we find in the books of Islamic law are the results of the ijtihad in a particular time. And our intellect is always going to be limited in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah because the Quran and Sunnah come from the absolute. They come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the Sunnah. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Allah says that the Prophet does not speak from himself, but rather it is divine inspiration, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah come from the realm of the divine. We're not divine. We don't receive revelation. So our understanding of the Quran and Sunnah is always going to be limited by our tools and our understanding now. So it is possible that future generations can understand things that previous generations did not understand. But the madhab is a system of thinking that gives us tools by which we can continually interpret the Quran and Sunnah. So it's something that lives. It's the exact opposite of something that's ossified.
So the Quran is the universal code forever. Doesn't mean that once we translate Quran or we try to understand it in the context, whether the present context, future context, the past context. Doesn't mean the meaning or the interpretation of Quran changes with time.
The interpretation changes with time.
That means the interpretation which was given by Abdul Ali some 6 years back, that may not hold true all the time at the same time today.
Yes and no. The interpretations, our understanding of the Quran and Sunnah change with time, place, person, circumstance. So as these things change, so does the application of the Quran and Sunnah change. So let's say application, not necessarily interpretation. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, La ilaha illallah, there's no new interpretation. La ilaha illallah means La ilaha illallah. There's no like, oh, by the way, we found out that there are two gods. That's not going to change. That tafsir won't change. But the application of the Quran and Sunnah in life today will always change because we change, people, place, time, and circumstance change. So the example I give, the water that I'm drinking now, this is not the same kind of water that the Prophet ﷺ used to drink. The Zamzam water today is not the same quality as the Zamzam water that the Prophet and the Sahaba ﷺ drank. The honey that he ate is not the honey that we eat. So all of these like Salafi-minded Muslims, I'm going to eat only what the Prophet ﷺ ate. They all have high cholesterol. Because the type of foods that we eat, all the honey that we eat now is all fake anyway. It's all fabricated. You know how much real honey costs? It's like expensive stuff to get real pure honey. The honey that we get at the grocery store, it's all made up. It's all like these additives and things like that. Sugar and sucrose and things like that. So things change, the time changes, circumstance changes, we change, etc. So therefore the application of the Quran and Sunnah will change. Yes, of course, and that's why the madhab is a tool that we need because it gives us the ability to change with the time. So I'm not going to be like this rabbi and says, oh, we're all struggling to understand. Why? This is easy. The Quran and the Sunnah, we have 14 centuries of literature, 14 centuries of scholarship, it's all there. There's nothing that the ulama have not talked about. There's nothing that the ulama have left unanswered. It's all there for us to read. He's saying that because he's embarrassed because he couldn't answer your questions.
I mean, why people say that? Because of these issues that even now people are still struggling to find a solution. Like we were talking about the interest, so the subject of the interest, the subject about the inheritance, where in the past and now people have changed. I mean, this is what people,
I'm struggling to understand my religion. No Muslim. MashaAllah, Anas came just for Isha prayer. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Dedicated. I'm struggling to understand the Quran and the Sunnah. We can't say that. That means that there's something that's like we missed or something that we don't understand. We have not had that problem. Our problem is that we're persecuted. Like I was saying in the khutbah, that that's our problem. Not that we don't understand the Quran and the Sunnah. Yeah.
So how and who decides what topics are up for reassessment?
Well, there's a secret committee that needs it. It depends on what the issue. It depends on what the issue is. So one of the things that we have is that we have this concept of consensus, ijma'. There are things that have been settled through consensus, and they're very few. I mean, the books that talk about all of the things of consensus are like little pamphlets. They're not even like full books, which means that if something is not an issue of consensus, it is something that can be negotiated or re-examined depending on what the need is. But that's only going to happen inside the rubric of the madhahib and the rules of ijtihad. So that leaves a lot. In ibadat, not so much, because what new is there to say about prayer and fasting? And I mean, those things are settled. There's not much wiggle room. But in all the other stuff, in our life, in our interactions, there's many things that are, like for example, all of our financial transactions today, almost none of them mirror anything in the classical books of fiqh. All these are new financial transactions. The nature of money itself is different. So all of these financial transactions is a whole aspect for us to engage in ijtihad, which we do. Which is why, bank interest is not riba and it's not haram and all that kind of stuff that we've been talking about, that I don't want to talk about anymore. All that stuff, because of the nature of these things have changed. The bank money today, when you go and read in like a classical book of Islamic law, that's not what money was back then. Money back then was actual gold coin, in your pocket. So many things are negotiable as long as they are not issues of consensus. Is it salat time? Yeah.
just thinking back to the banking. The last 10 to 3 years, when Islamic banking became popular in African countries, it was interesting that some commercial banks, like Barclays, Standard Chartered, started opening windows.
Yeah, for Islamic Sharia compliant
And
transactions.
then many shares became in the board. I mean, you will be a lot of boards today in my country. Because Egypt,
Take me, man. 50,000 per month per bank. Back to ICCP, ICCP will be like a castle by the end of 1 year. All that stuff is fake. All that stuff, most of that stuff is fake. Because it's a way to make money, it's a way to market. It's not, it's so funny. The Sharia banks end up incurring haram interest that they have to give out every year. So even then, in their own scheme, which I don't agree with, they're not able to navigate behind it. And this is a huge conversation, but it really comes back to, the sisters asking about what things changed. It really comes back to, we have a principle in usul al-fiqh, al-hukmu ala shay far'un an tasawwuri. To pass a ruling on something, you have to first understand and capture it in your mind. What is interest? What is bank interest? What is it? It has to be defined. What ends up happening is that Muslims are so lazy, they just sloppily apply a label to something. So for the last 20, 30 years, Muslims have been saying interest is riba, riba is haram. Interest is riba, riba is haram. Interest is riba, riba is haram. So you come and you ask somebody, what do you say about bank interest? Halal. Astaghfirullah azim. I was in the mosque and the imam said riba is halal. Yeah, but bank interest is not riba. Just like the cow is not the pig. If I got a cow and I said this is a pig and the pig is haram, this is a pig and the pig is haram, and I kept saying it over and over, and no one questioned me, and then I ate it, you'll say, oh, the imam ate a pig. It's the same thing. We have called the bank interest riba for so long that it's everyone here has a checking account. Everyone here deals with interest. Everyone here has a loan. This is not haram, as has been stated, for the last God knows how many years by all of the major fiqh bodies, etc., etc. Why? Because you have to understand what that thing is first. And that burden is on the mufti. The mufti has to understand what that thing is first. When I was in Egypt and I was living, and when I was working in the Ifta office, the mufti, every month, he sat with the governor of the National Bank of Egypt to understand all of the new transactions. Now that's somebody who made the effort to learn about these things. So when he says the bank interest is not the riba for this reason and that reason and gold and silver, so yeah, okay, he's somebody that made the effort to understand what bank interest is. Says no, it's not haram. This is where it comes from. So we talk about this way too much, though. We're never going back there again. Either you listen to me or don't listen to me. Everyone is free. I'm not going to change my opinion. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam.